Hello there. I am the Magic number 3. I am a killer main in Dead by Daylight, and today I am going to show you one of my favorite killers, the Huntress. So I'm going to be breaking this video up into a few segments. First, what the killer does, and the basics around the killer and their power. Second, what maps they prefer and why they prefer those maps. Third, her teachables and their uses. Fourth, a few different builds consisting of their teachable perks and not, and also perks that are better versus higher ranks and lower ranks. Fifth, a couple small details about how to approach loops with her, especially loops in which you would be at a disadvantage. And then lastly, what survivors are watching out for whenever you're playing against her. First, let's check out our basic attributes. As you can see here, her movement speed is 4.4 ms. A regular survivor speed is 4 ms, so she's slightly faster than a survivor. But a basic killer's movement is about 4.6 ms, so she's still slower than most killers, which is one thing that bogs her down whenever it comes to loops. But we'll get to that later. Her tear radius is 20 meters, which is a lot smaller than most regular speed killers at around a 32 meter tear radius. This gives her a bit of leeway whenever it comes to coming to survivors, but that's only regarding a tear radius. One thing that happens with Huntress is that she hums over the duration of the trial. This lullaby, which was sung by her mom whenever she was taking her dying breath after being gorged by an elk, reaches around 45 meters. So the tear radius itself doesn't really do justice to the fact that survivors can still hear her coming. She is a tall killer. Tall killers have different pickup animations than short killers, and they can see over smaller loot objects and get angles that shorter killers, like the pig, wouldn't be able to get. Huntress's hatchets work the same regardless of her add-ons, so I won't really be going over add-ons until we talk about builds. Alongside the ability to swing her primary weapon, she can wind up and throw throwing hatchets. These hatchets drop the survivor in one health state if they connect. So, from healthy to injured, from injured to dying, etc. The longer you wind up a hatchet, the faster the hatchet will move. However, the Huntress is slow while winding up hatchets, so be really careful when you do this. When a hatchet's fully charged, there will be an audio cue. That's when the hatchet will move its fastest. Okay, now let's get into the maps. There are two specific maps that I want to bring to your attention here. First is the Dead Dog Saloon. Dead Dog is by far one of my favorite killer maps in general. It's straightforward and has very reliable and stable generation, good sightlines, and the ability to directly see more than one gen while patrolling, which really helps killers. However, Huntress is a special case. The elevation on this map gives her a lot of good spots to hit survivors from a range while closing their distance. Also, certain hook spots gives her the ability to punish altruistic acts from afar, even while chasing another survivor. This will give you so much pressure that survivors won't know when it's safe to do anything. Second is Rotten Field from the Coldwind Farm generation. Rotten Field has a lot of corn, but corn does not prevent you from throwing hatchets. Once you get some practice with Huntress, you will be able to punish this specific map generation so hard that you'd think the survivors are taking it easy on you. Now let's talk about some generalized map knowledge. Maps that have low walls and extended sightlines are pretty good for Huntress. Even the indoor map Midwich Elementary School is an okay Huntress map due to the low desks and snackable corridors. But don't rely on the game or Larry's Memorial Hospital. An experienced Huntress can end chases in these maps rather quickly through the map knowledge and prediction, but high walls and twist and turn corridors really hamper the Huntress's effectiveness, especially if she can't end chases quickly. Map knowledge and Huntress go hand in hand, and that knowledge will only come with experience. So really focus on learning maps when you pick up this killer. It'll help you so much. Okay, now let's move on. Before I get into her teachables, I want to touch on one thing real fast. That's a game mechanic called Bloodlust. After chasing a survivor for a while, you will gain a stack of Bloodlust. You can only ever have up to 3 stacks of Bloodlust, and you lose all Bloodlust once you either break a pallet, hit a survivor, or lose a survivor in a chase. Bloodlust grants the killer bonus movement speed, which will allow them to eventually catch the survivor that's giving them a hard time. I hope this helps, because this will come into play right now with the Huntress' first teachable perk, Beast of Prey. Beast of Prey will give the killer the undetectable status after gaining a single tier of Bloodlust. Undetectable will remove the killer's red stain and set their terror radius to 0. This perk also gives bonus blood points in the Hunter category after its activation. A link to blood point categories and how to achieve them will be in the video description if you're curious. The Huntress' second teachable perk is Territorial Imperative. This just lets you see a survivor if they enter the basement, if you're within a certain range of the basement whenever they do so. Okay, before we get into Huntress' last perk, let me give you a quick explanation of how a Hex perk works. When you enter a trial, there are 5 little piles of bones, called totems, that spawn at random locations around the map. If you have a Hex perk, the perk will power one of these totems, causing it to glow and give off a faint crackling sound like a fire. Survivors can cleanse these totems, and once a Hex perk totem has been cleansed, that perk will no longer be available to the killer for the rest of the trial. Now that we've got that out of the way, let me tell you about the actual perk itself. Hex Huntress Lullaby is by far my favorite out of all of the Huntress perks. If the killer hooks a survivor while the perk is active, it reduces the delay between the skill check noises for repair and healing skill checks. This means the survivor will have less time to prepare to actually hit skill checks. This perk will also ramp up over the course of the trial, decreasing the delay between the noises for each hook you've gotten up to 4. Once you get 5 hooks in a single trial, survivors no longer get any noises before these skill checks happen. This perk also increases the regression penalties if the survivor actually fails a skill check. This will cause survivors to hunt for the Hex totem if they're struggling too hard to get the skill checks to complete the objective. Okay, now let's go ahead and talk about add-ons and perk builds. Whenever it comes to add-ons, I'm only going to be talking about 5 specific add-ons, which I believe are the best Huntress add-ons in the game. After that, we'll go on ahead and we'll talk about a build that is good on Huntress without any sort of teachable perks, and then a build that is really good with teachable perks that would be, I believe, most effective at higher ranks. So whenever it comes to the add-ons, the King of Kings or Queens of Queens, in the Huntress' case, of all of their add-ons is the Iridescent Head. It is the most broken add-on that the Huntress can equip, and I prefer if people would avoid this one like the plague, especially whenever they're learning the Huntress. Now, I'm not saying that in order to try and dissuade you from using it. I am, however, trying to dissuade you from using it, because this head is so flippin' toxic. It instantly downs survivors if you hit them. Let's say if you use it in 5 games, you're going to get at least 3 disconnects between those 5 games, and that is at least. My goodness, avoid this thing like the plague. And I'm not talking about the killing the plague, I'm talking about like an actual sickness, like avoid it like COVID, keep 6 feet apart. Yeah. The next 2 add-ons we're going to be talking about is the Flower Babushka and the Mana Grass Braid. In my personal opinion, these are the second best add-ons outside of the Iridescent Head, due to the fact that you're able to wind up your hatchets faster, which means that you don't need to waste as much time winding up hatchets in order to reach their maximum speed, range, and potential. You'll be able to catch survivors a lot easier and in a lot scarier situations, because you don't have to wind up hatchets for nearly as long. They won't know how to react due to the speed that you're just chucking hatchets out. And finally, the last 2 add-ons we're going to be talking about is the Infantry Belt and the Leather Loop. These 2 add-ons allow you to carry more hatchets, the Infantry Belt letting you carry 2 more, and the Leather Loop letting you carry 1 more. This will make it so you don't have to reload at a locker that often, so you're able to apply more pressure because you're not having to waste extra time. That's really it. You're able to use these 2 together to get 3 extra hatchets, or you can use it in tandem with either of the other sets that we talked about, so you could have, say, Infantry Belt and Flower Babushka, or Leather Loop and Mana Grass Braid, so that you have the faster wind-ups and you have bonus hatchets, Or if you really, really want, you can use the infantry build and the iridescent head to have 3 instant out hatchets, but don't tell anybody that I told you that because I don't need that kind of karma on me. Okay, we're done here. Okay, now that we got the curse of the add-ons out of the way, let's go on ahead and go into a nice beginner perk build for the Huntress. This build will not require any teachables from any other killer, so that you can focus on leveling up the Huntress and just the Huntress if that's what you would like. However, this build really won't work at higher ranks because of the fact that survivors will be more experienced. So once you start getting around the 10 to 9 range of ranks, you're really going to want to start switching these out for the next build that we'll talk about in a moment. So this beginner build consists of Whispers, Thrill of the Hunt, Huntress Lullaby, and Sloppy Butcher. I won't be going over Huntress Lullaby here since I went over it in our teachable section, so head over there if you need to know what that perk does. Whispers will allow you to track survivors, because the entity will whisper to you and let you know if a survivor is within a certain radius of you. The perk also lights up when it's active, in case hearing the whispers is a bit too difficult to keep track of. This perk is really good off of the start of the game, because you can patrol generators until the perk goes off and know if a survivor is around a specific generator. It's also good if you're performing well and killing survivors. The more survivors are dead, the more careful the rest of the team is likely to play. Whispers will eliminate their ability to play super safe because you'll always know if a survivor is within a certain area. Thrill of the Hunt is another hex perk. This perk will give you a nice bit of blood points in the Hunter category to level up, and it will let you know if a survivor is attempting to cleanse under your hex totems. It gives you a loud noise indicator, much like the ones that survivors give off whenever they fail a skill check. You'll be able to use this in order to know if a survivor is trying to cleanse your Hunter Lullaby or your Toll of the Hunt totems. Protecting these will give you pressure because getting hooks will slow the survivors down via the skill check problems of Hunter's Lullaby. And lastly, we have Sloppy Butcher, which allows your regular hits to inflict both hemorrhage and mangled status effects on the survivor. Hemorrhage causes a survivor to bleed more, so you also have a little bit of blood trails to follow if you're in a chase, and mangled causes them to heal slower. Alongside Huntress Lullaby affecting the healing skill checks, this will give you a lot of breathing room and slow down the progress of the survivors by a lot. Okay, so you're starting to move up in the ranks and starting to get used to Huntress and want to start putting points into really increasing your Huntress game? Well, there's 2 types of great builds you can go for, the Huntress Control build and the Huntress Aggro build. To be honest, they're only about 1 perk apart, but both can drastically change the course of a Huntress game. So like I said, these builds are only 1 perk apart. So I'm going to go on ahead and list the other 3 perks right now. Those perks are Barbecue and Chili from Leatherface, Nurse's Calling from the Nurse, and I'm All Ears from Ghostface. I'm sure at this stage you're starting to become a pretty experienced Huntress, but I still want to give you a quick rundown on what each of these 3 perks do. Barbecue and Chili from Leatherface gives you the ability to see all survivors outside of your terror radius or outside of 40 meters away from you after you hook another survivor. For each independent survivor you hook, you also get a stack, which increases the amount of blood points that you get after the end of the trial, so it's always worth to have if you're trying to level up anyway. But it's really that first part, being able to see auras, that makes this perk so good on Huntress. Nurse's Calling allows you to see the auras of survivors healing within a certain radius of you. This makes it so that you can keep on applying pressure to survivors that are trying to heal near you, or survivors that are trying to get unhooks and then retreat to safety. And the last perk of this 3 is I'm All Ears from Ghostface. This perk allows you to see a survivor's aura if they do a rushed action like a vault on a window or a vault over a pallet near you within a certain range. Using this alongside being able to see somebody's aura in the middle of a chase and them not being able to see yours lets you really drastically change how you play and how the survivor is forced to play. It also opens up a lot of mind game options that a survivor wouldn't really expect. Now the last 2 perks that make or break the difference between a control Huntress and an aggro Huntress are these. A control Huntress instead brings Corrupt Intervention from the Plague. Corrupt Intervention blocks the 3 furthest generators from you whenever you spawn into the map. This forces survivors to start coming in near you if they want to get the objectives done. If they don't come near you, then they're not getting anything done. However, if they do come near you, you're going to be able to track them and put them down super fast to prevent them from getting the objectives done. And then there's an aggro last perk, which is the one that I personally use. And this one is Better Murmur. This actually is not a teachable perk, and you can get it from the start of the game. And what Better Murmur does is whenever a generator is completed, you get to see the auras of all of the survivors that are around that generator. This is such a good perk because of the fact that you get to see exactly where a survivor will be pathing after the generator is completed. Gives you a lot of pressure because you can start hitting cross-map snipes. And because you're able to see where multiple survivors are pathing after a gen is completed, you can corral survivors and force them all to group up to apply pressure to more than one survivor at a time. Okay, now that we have a lot of the more important stuff out of the way, I'm going to go on ahead and just give you a couple of tips about looping with Huntress. Granted, she is a slower killer, so you don't want to have to commit to a lot of more skilled loops than you would like. These tips will help you close out loops that you would otherwise not be able to, especially whenever you're just starting out. Okay, tip number 1 is to not chase healthy survivors that are on a good loop tile. So a good loop tile typically has one pallet and one window. You don't want to loop a healthy survivor here because of the fact that the survivor will be able to take one free hit without having to throw the pallet down. If they throw the pallet down, granted, you can still hatchet them over the pallet if they are doing it within your line of sight, but more often than not, especially good survivors, will wait until you're around the corner, throw the pallet down a little bit early, crawl to the side of the wall, and then either force you to continue looping on that pallet, which is already super disadvantageous for you, or will continue to use the window and really make you use that tile up. The biggest issue with this is the fact that the healthy survivor can take 2 hits. That just wastes way too much of the Huntress's time and makes it so that you won't be able to apply enough pressure to continue the game. Tip number 2 is to try and abuse low wall loops. High walls can block your hatchets and give survivors places to hide. Low wall loops give you an advantage due to the fact that you're able to get cheeky hatchets over the terrain. Tip number 3 is to only attempt to go for a hatchet whenever somebody's about to throw down a pallet if you are already directly behind the survivor. If the survivor's turning a corner and throwing down the pallet, you winding up a hatchet right there could allow them to just continue running and looping the same pallet because your hatchet slows you down. Make sure you reload your hatchets if you're out before trying to commit to a chase on a survivor. As a slower killer, this will drastically reduce your success and allow survivors to waste more time than they would. If you know a survivor is going to commit to a window vault, throw a hatchet that will arc just below where the window is, so the survivor can't crouch to dodge your hatchet after vaulting. Practice really makes perfect whenever it comes to these tips. And the biggest tip, and this doesn't just go for Huntress, this goes for every single killer in the game. Commit to your mind games. If you don't, you will be your own worst enemy, waste your own time, and you will not be able to catch the survivor. Okay, now that we have those tips out of the way, there are 3 things survivors are constantly looking out for whenever they're playing against a Huntress. The first is they're listening for the lullaby. The lullaby isn't directional, but it does get louder the closer the Huntress is. So the moment they start hearing it, they'll be paying attention to its volume to know if you're passing toward them or not. The second is that they're listening for the fully charged hatchet sound. This sound is global, so survivors will be paying close attention to if they hear it or not. And lastly, survivors, especially during loops, will be watching how you're spacing. If you start giving them some space whenever they're about to loop toward the pallet, they're probably going to assume you're going to be charging a hatchet and keep running with the extra space you've just given them for free. So do your best to stay tight whenever you're forced on these pallet loops. Well, that'll do it for this Huntress guide. If you liked it, please hit the like button and don't forget to subscribe. My next guide will likely be on the Trappy Boy himself. If there's anything you think I missed or have questions on, please post a comment and I'll get to you as soon as I can. I'm always looking for ways to interact with you guys. Love you, and have fun in the fog. Son of a bitch!